Look at Kaelen's hair. Drew Harper's voice sliced through the classroom chatter. His tone was sharp, mocking, and impossible to ignore. Kaelen Rivers kept his head down, gripping his pencil tighter as he tried to focus on the blank page in front of him. Lila Vance leaned forward from behind him, her smirk cutting like glass. Seriously, is it supposed to be some kind of bird's nest? Or are you just trying too hard? Before Kaelen could respond, she grabbed a strand of his afro and yanked it hard. Pain shot through his scalp, but worse than that was the wave of laughter that followed. The room erupted, students pointing and jeering, their voices blending into a cacophony of cruelty. Kaelen turned toward her, his face flushed with shame and anger. "Let go," he said, his voice tight, trembling. Lila released his hair with an exaggerated flourish, her grin widening. "Oh, come on, don't act so sensitive." The laughter grew louder, pressing against him like a weight. He clenched his fists under the table, staring at the notebook in front of him, desperate for the ground to swallow him whole. Just as the noise reached its peak, the door swung open. Ms. Ellery Carmine stepped inside, her heels clicking against the floor. Her eyes scanned the room, pausing briefly on Kaelen before she spoke. "What's going on here?" Drew immediately pointed at Kaelen. "He's the one causing all the drama, Ms. Carmine. He knows people are gonna laugh when he wears his hair. Like you, That Ms. Carmine sighed, her expression shifting subtly. Not quite disapproval, but something close. She looked at Kaelen, her tone soft yet laced with judgment. "Kaelen, maybe if you didn't wear your hair in such an unusual style, people wouldn't tease you so much." The words hit harder than Lila's hands ever could. Kaelen froze, his throat tightening. Unusual. The word echoed in his mind, making him feel smaller, more exposed. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but no sound came out. The class fell silent for a moment, the tension thick enough to choke. And then, just as the quiet began to stretch, the door burst open again. A commanding voice filled the room, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Which one of you thinks bullying is funny?" All eyes turned to the figure standing in the doorway. Officer Nia Caldera, her police badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights, stepped inside. Her gaze swept over the students, locking onto Drew and Lila with unmistakable intensity. "This ends now," she said, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. Ms. Carmine stepped forward hesitantly, her voice faltering. "Officer Caldera, I think we can handle this internally." Nia cut her off, her tone sharper this time. "Internally? You mean letting these kids humiliate my son while you stand by and blame him for their behavior?" The room went silent again, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. Kaelen felt his chest tighten, unsure whether to feel relief or fear. His mother wasn't just here, she was ready to fight. But as the tension mounted, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. "Say that again. Louder. Please." Officer Nia Caldera's voice was calm but carried an edge sharp enough to silence the room. Lila Vance shifted uncomfortably under her piercing gaze, her earlier defiance wavering but not entirely gone. "I said it was just a joke," Lila muttered, crossing her arms defiantly. "A joke?" Nia stepped closer, pulling out her phone and tapping the record button. "Let's make sure everyone hears exactly how funny you think bullying is." Lila's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. "You can't do that." Nia raised an eyebrow, her tone icy. "Watch me." Ms. Ellery Carmine hurried over, attempting to intervene. "Officer Caldera, this isn't necessary. These are children. We should handle this privately." "Privately?" Nia turned to face her, her voice rising slightly. "So they can keep laughing at my son behind closed doors while you tell him it's his fault for existing?" The teacher flinched, stammering. "That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant," Nia interrupted, her words cutting through the excuses like a knife. "And if you don't want this conversation on camera, too, maybe you'll start taking responsibility instead of blaming the victim." Drew Harper, pale and visibly shaken, mumbled an apology. "I'm sorry, Kaelen, I didn't mean anything by it." Kaelen sat frozen, unsure how to process the sudden shift in power. For once, someone was standing up for him, but it came with its own kind of cost. The tension in the room felt suffocating, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this confrontation would have consequences far beyond the classroom walls. Later that day, Principal Gregory Vale sat across from Officer Caldera in his office, his expression carefully neutral but tinged with irritation. "Officer Caldera," he began, leaning back in his chair, "while I understand your concern as a parent, don't you think storming into a classroom and recording students was excessive?" Nia leaned forward, her posture unyielding. "Excessive. My son was being humiliated in front of his peers because of his hair, and no one stopped. So if anything, your staff enabled it." Vale sighed, folding his hands on the desk. "Look, we all want harmony here. But let's be honest. Kaelen's choice of hairstyle draws attention. Perhaps encouraging him to conform to more conventional styles would prevent these kinds of incidents." Nia's jaw tightened, her patience wearing thin. "Are you seriously suggesting my son change who he is to avoid racism? That's textbook systemic bias. And if you're not careful, I'll make sure the whole district knows about it." Vale's composure slipped for a moment, his voice hardening. "Threatening legal action won't solve anything. It'll only divide our community further." "It's not a threat," Nia shot back. "It's accountability. And if you don't address the real issue here, I'll ensure every parent in this town understands exactly why their kids aren't safe in your school." The air between them crackled with tension, neither willing to back down. As Vale struggled to regain control of the conversation, Nia stood abruptly, signaling the end of their discussion. "This isn't over," she said firmly before walking out, leaving Vale fuming in her wake. At home, Kaelen sat on the couch staring blankly at the TV screen without really seeing it. His sister Rhea walked in, plopping down beside him with a sigh. "You okay?" she asked, nudging him lightly. Kaelen shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "Doesn't matter. Nobody gets it anyway." Rhea frowned, brushing off his words. "Come on. Kaelen, kids are gonna tease each other. It happens. You just gotta toughen up." He looked at her then, hurt flashing in his eyes. "Toughen up? They pulled my hair, Rhea, in front of everyone, and Mom had to storm in like some cop drama just so they'd stop." Rhea hesitated, guilt flickering across her face. After a long pause, she spoke softly. "I get it, okay? I know what it's like. When I was in high school, they used to call me names too. So I changed my hair, flattened it, straightened it, did whatever it took to fit in." Kaelen stared at her, stunned. "You never told me that." "Because I regret it," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Every time I looked in the mirror, I hated myself for letting them win. And now I see you going through the same thing, and I don't know how to fix it without making it worse." Her confession hung heavy between them, filling the room with a mix of anger and sorrow. Kaelen felt more alone than ever, not because of the bullies or the teachers, but because even his own family couldn't fully understand what he was fighting for. By morning, the video of Officer Caldera confronting the bullies had gone viral. Comments flooded social media platforms, some praising her bravery, others accusing her of overstepping. "Finally, someone standing up against racism in schools," one commenter wrote. "She's abusing her authority." Another shot back. "This isn't justice, it's intimidation." Kaelen scrolled through the endless stream of opinions, his stomach churning. Supporters rallied under hashtags like "Done Justice for Kaelen" and "Josh End School Racism." But for every supportive message, there were hateful ones targeting him and his family. "Your son deserves to be bullied," read one particularly cruel comment. "Teach him to act normal and people will treat him better." Nia noticed Kaelen glued to his phone and gently took it from his hands. "Don't read those," she said softly. "They don't matter." But Kaelen shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "They do matter, Mom. Everyone's watching us now. What if they don't believe us? What if they think we're the bad guys?" Before she could respond, the doorbell rang, interrupting the moment. Outside stood a journalist holding a microphone, surrounded by cameras. "Officer Caldera, can we get a statement about the incident?" The spotlight had found them, and there was no turning back. Kaelen sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor as if searching for answers in the cracks. His backpack lay untouched by the door, a silent reminder of the world he no longer felt ready to face. "I can't go back there," he said finally, his voice barely audible but heavy with defeat. Naya turned from where she stood folding laundry, her expression softening. "Kaelen." "No," he interrupted, his tone sharper than he intended. "It's not just them anymore, it's everyone. The kids, the teachers, even strangers online. They all think I'm some kind of problem because of my hair. How am I supposed to walk into that school and pretend everything's fine?" Before Nia could respond, her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen and sighed, rubbing her temples. Another email about the disciplinary hearing. The school board was calling her actions unprofessional and disruptive. Parents were demanding consequences, not for the bullies, but for her. Ria walked in moments later holding her own phone. Her usual confident demeanor was replaced by unease. "Mom, people are saying you're using your badge to bully kids now. Some parents are threatening to pull their kids out of school over this." Naya clenched her jaw, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. But what hurt most wasn't the backlash. It was watching her family fracture under the weight of it all. Kaelen retreated further into himself. Ria oscillated between guilt and defensiveness, and she felt stretched thin, trying to hold them together while fighting battles on every front. For the first time, doubt crept in. Was standing up for justice worth tearing apart the life they'd built? A knock at the door interrupted the tense silence. When Nia opened it, she found a woman with sharp eyes and an air of quiet determination. "Officer Caldera?" The woman. So extending a hand. "I'm Marlo Trent. I write for the Equity Chronicle." "May I come in?" Nia hesitated but stepped aside, curiosity outweighing caution. Once inside, Marlo wasted no time getting to the point. "I've been investigating systemic racism in schools for years," she began, pulling out a tablet. "Your case caught my attention, not just because of the bullying, but because it highlights something much bigger. Principal Vale has a history of discriminatory policies, doesn't he?" Nia frowned. "What do you mean?" Marlo tapped the screen, revealing documents and emails. "These came from an anonymous tip. Look familiar?" Nia scanned the files, her breath catching as she recognized language eerily similar to what Valve had said during their meeting. One email stood out. "We need stricter grooming codes. These cultural hairstyles are distracting and unprofessional." "This is proof," Marlo said firmly. "With this, we can turn public opinion and force accountability. But we'll need your help to make it happen." Nia looked at her, then at Kaelen sitting silently in the corner. For weeks they'd been fighting alone. Now they had a chance to fight back, not just for themselves, but for every student who'd ever been told they didn't belong. "What do I need to do?" Nia asked, resolve hardening in her voice. The town hall meeting was packed, murmurs rippling through the crowd like waves. Principal Gregory Vale stood at the podium, his polished smile masking thinly veiled irritation. "Let me be clear," he began, addressing the room. "This institution values diversity and inclusion above all else. Any claims otherwise are baseless accusations meant to divide us." Murmurs of agreement spread among some attendees, but others exchanged skeptical glances. Nia sat near the front, flanked by Kaelen and Ria, her hands gripping the arms of her chair tightly. When Vale finished speaking, Marlo stepped forward, microphone in hand. "Thank you, Principal Vale. Now, let's talk specifics. Can you explain these emails?" She held up printed copies of the damning correspondence, projecting them onto a large screen for everyone to see. Gasps echoed through the room as Vale's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. "That's taken out of context," Vale protested, his composure slipping. But before he could say more, Ria stood abruptly, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You want context? Here's context." She pulled out her phone and played a recording of Vale dismissing concerns about cultural bias during a previous staff meeting. The crowd erupted, voices rising in outrage. Vale stammered, trying to defend himself. The tide had turned. "Enough," Nia said, stepping forward. Her voice was steady, commanding silence. If you truly valued diversity, Mr. Vale, you wouldn't have mocked it behind closed doors. And if you won't step down, we'll make sure the entire district knows exactly who you are. Vale's face went pale as the weight of the moment sank in. Within minutes, he was escorted out of the meeting, his resignation inevitable. But the victory felt bittersweet. As the crowd cheered, Kaelen looked around, realizing this was only the beginning of a much larger fight. The days following the town hall meeting brought a wave of change to Kaelen's school. Anti-bias training became mandatory for all staff, and the outdated dress code policy was rewritten to explicitly celebrate cultural diversity. Flyers promoting inclusivity lined the hallways, and posters featuring students of all backgrounds adorned bulletin boards. For Kaelen, returning to school felt surreal. He expected whispers, lingering judgment, but instead he found something unexpected: support. Classmates who had once laughed at him now approached him between classes, offering quiet apologies or simply acknowledging his presence with nods and smiles. Even Miss Carmine seemed different, her tone softer, more deliberate when addressing the class. One morning as Kaelen walked through the crowded hallway, he overheard two students discussing the new policies. "It's about time," one said. "Why should anyone have to change who they are just to fit in?" Kaelen paused, letting the words sink in. For so long he'd carried the weight of feeling like an outsider. Now, he realized, he wasn't alone anymore. People were starting to see what he'd always known. His hair wasn't a distraction. It was part of his identity. But even as things improved, Kaelen couldn't shake the memory of those who'd hurt him most. One name lingered in his mind: Lila Vance. It happened after school one afternoon. Kaelen was packing up his backpack when he noticed someone hovering near his desk. He looked up to find Lila standing there, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her expression uneasy. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kaelen hesitated but nodded, stepping out into the empty hallway. They stood there for a moment, neither speaking, until Lila finally broke the silence. "I didn't have a choice," she blurted out, her eyes fixed on the floor. "My dad. He's the one who told me to make fun of you. He said people like you need to learn their place." Kaelen stared at her, stunned. Of all the explanations he'd imagined, this wasn't one of them. "I didn't want to do it," Lila continued, tears welling up in her eyes. "But if I didn't, he'd get mad. And then everyone else started laughing, and I didn't know how to stop." She trailed off, her voice trembling. Kaelen felt a pang of sympathy despite himself. He'd spent weeks consumed by anger, resentment, but now faced with her vulnerability, he saw a side of Lila he hadn't considered before. "You should have said something," he said quietly. "I know," she admitted, wiping her tears. "I'm sorry, Kaelen. Really sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know why." Kaelen took a deep breath, weighing her words. Forgiveness didn't come easily, not after everything, but he also understood what it meant to feel trapped. Slowly he nodded. "I forgive you," he said, his voice steady. "But don't let anyone tell you who to be again." Lila looked at him, surprise and relief washing over her face. "Thank you," she whispered before walking away. As Kaelen watched her leave, he felt a strange sense of closure. Letting go of the anger didn't erase the pain, but it lightened the burden he'd been carrying. That evening, Nia sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through messages on her phone. The story of their fight against systemic racism had spread far beyond their small town. Families across the country reached out, sharing their own experiences and thanking her for standing up. "It's amazing," Ria said, leaning against the counter. "People are actually listening." Nia smiled faintly, though her thoughts were heavy. "This isn't just our story anymore. It's theirs too. The kids who've been told they don't belong, the parents fighting for change. We gave them a voice, but the work isn't done." Kaelen entered the room, overhearing the tail end of the conversation. "Do you think it'll make a difference?" he asked, his tone tinged with uncertainty. "It already has," Nia replied, looking at him with pride. "You've shown people that standing up for yourself isn't just about winning. It's about refusing to stay silent. That's how real change happens. The next morning, Kaelen stood outside the school doors, sunlight streaming down around him. For weeks, he'd dreaded this moment. Today was different. Today, he walked in with his head held high, his afro catching the light like a crown. Students passed by, some nodding in acknowledgement, others smiling warmly. As he made his way to class, Kaelen realized something important. Resilience wasn't about never falling. It was about rising every time you did. And this time, he wasn't rising alone. Crafting meaningful content like this requires significant time, effort, and dedication to ensure it resonates and sparks important discussions. It's a heartfelt endeavor aimed at fostering connection and understanding. If this piece resonated with you or offered value, consider liking, commenting, or sharing it. These small actions make a big difference. Subscribing is another way to support the creation of impactful stories like this one. Your encouragement fuels the commitment to deliver thought-provoking content. Thank you for your support and for appreciating the importance of stories that inspire change.